God can handle whatever it is that you create, like no matter how ugly or raw it is. I think in your creative process, wrestling with God is really important and allowing space for that and just knowing that He is there to wrestle with you. If you always try to temper the things that you create, you risk never creating anything with substance because you're often hiding from yourself or from God.
Welcome back to Abiding Creatives podcast. Today I'm so excited to be talking to Zemeira Walker, who is a faithful creative and has a degree in art and theology. So I'm excited to be talking to her about faith and how God sees our creativity, and it's going to be a great conversation. So before we get into it, I want to invite you to like, share, and leave a comment on the podcast. It would mean so much to me if you could help me keep sharing this podcast with all the faithful creatives who need to hear it. Now let's dive in. Welcome back to Abiding Creatives. Today, I'm so excited to be talking to my friend Zemeira Walker. Zemeira, why don't you share a little bit about who you are and your creative work?
Hi, so I am Zemeira. I am a mountain girl who then moved to Chicago and then to Scotland to do my master's and then have now wound up in LA. Been in and out of creative practice since I was a kid. I have very creative parents and have kind of pursued art and theology, both academically. My master's is in theology and the arts, and then also in my career, I currently work at Upside Down, which is a cafe and art gallery in Westwood, LA. And it is a really fun space that's owned and operated by Juice for Jesus. And we are constantly interacting with art and asking deep questions and flipping narratives on their heads. So that's a lot of where my creative practice has led me. But I also illustrate and I paint and I draw. I've illustrated a children's book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
and
so
since
cool.
then I've kind of just like messed around. Creativity is like one of the most important things in my life in a way that I've been able to just process a lot, and I've found it ministers to both me and others, and it's the main way that I tend to connect with God.
That's so cool, Zemeira. You and I actually connected last year, and that week that we met, I was praying to God specifically, like, I just don't have a lot of people in my life that like really get this specific vision that I have about art and faith. And it was just really cool to meet you that day at Upside Down because it was such an answer to prayer and being like, oh, here's somebody. We actually go to the same church, it turned out, and like just kind of speaking the same language. And I mean, that's something that I really am trying to help build community for through this podcast. So I'm so excited to dive into just hearing more about the ways that you connect with God through creativity and have learned and studied about that, because it's something not everyone gets the opportunity to do, but it's really affirming, I know, to the artists that are listening to hear about that. So I'm curious, what got you interested in studying art and theology?
So I've always been interested in creative practices. Like I was saying earlier, I grew up drawing and writing and all of those things. And it was a way for me to have fun, really. But then as I got older, I became more serious about it. I realized that it was something that I also had some talent in and that just came naturally to me. And so I wanted to start pursuing it. When I started looking into colleges and things, I was thinking of going to art school. And then when I was 16, my hometown actually burnt down in the campfire. And it like flipped my whole life upside down. Like I had to like start over, like I had nothing. And there was this moment when my family was driving back through the town after the fire had happened, and everything was just like rubble that we were surrounded by. And it was really hard because I was in a place that I grew up, but I didn't recognize anything at all around me. Um, but then as we were driving through, there was this mural on the side of this burnt out building. And it was just like a really simple mural of like a beautiful woman or something like that. But it was this symbol of growth and creativity and something new in the midst of destruction. And it really touched me because it just was a light that gave me hope. in like a really dark time, because it showed me literally beauty exists in the ashes and beauty continues after these terrible things happen.
Mm.
And we later found out that that was by an artist named Shane Grammer, who is actually an LA-based artist, I believe. And he does that kind of thing a lot, like art and
Oh,
healing
wow.
is one of his main things. I got to meet him, and that's really cool. But it was that
Mm.
moment that kind of made me
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh, like art
Wow, that's so
isn't just fun. Art isn't just healing for me, but art can be healing for others. And that was really significant to me because I think even though I was interested in art,
mm.
I also have a pull towards justice, and I really value ministering to others and caring for others. And I think sometimes art can seem very self-expressive and self-focused. So I was like, okay, I want to pursue art and ministry. Like, I
Mm.
want to learn how to make art that actually helps people. And so I started looking into different things. I wound up going to Moody
Mm.
Bible Institute and studying communications there. And they have an art and theology journal that I got to be a designer on. Um,
Mm.
and that was like one of the main reasons I applied there, was because I saw this publication that they were doing. And
Wow.
my sister had gone there, so I kind of just I went anyway after her. And then as I was there and working on the art and theology journal and had more opportunities to interact with theology and talk with professors about what that means for literature and for art and for creativity, I found that I like was really unsatisfied with my education when I came to the end of it. I was like, there's so much more I need to learn. And that was one of the things that I was like, this is the question I could ask forever. And I had some advice from a professor that was like,
Mm.
get your master's in the question that you could ask forever. Like, don't get your master's just to get a job. Like, if you want to study something, study the thing
Wow.
that you want to keep studying after your master's. And so I was like, okay, I need to study this. And I found out about St. Andrews, University of St.
Mm.
Andrews,
Mm-hmm.
and their program there, the Theology and the Arts program. It's pretty rare to have an
Mm-hmm.
interdisciplinary art and theology program. There's more now than there have been, but it was like one of the only places. So I went and I pursued it with the goal of potentially going on to art school, but with a foundation of theology and art, or with the goal of teaching and just continuing to explore what it means to ask questions of God and about God with and through art. And yeah, then after that, I felt like, okay,
Mm.
I've understood this a lot esoterically. There's still a lot more to understand and to explore and learn, and I'm excited for it. But can I take these theoretical things and apply them to like real life? And what does
Mm-hmm.
it look like on the ground level? And so then I wound up at Upside Down, kind of exploring that question.
So cool to hear just kind of the transformation that's happened in your life in the last several years. I don't know if everyone that's listening knows my story, but I lost my home in the LA fires last year. And that's another part of kind of Zemeira and I connecting. Like, that was just such a specific connection that God placed in my life at a time that I really needed it. And it's just really cool to be able to hear how God met you in that time through art. And I know that he has connected with me through art too. And a lot of kind of what I'm doing now with this podcast and with my art is like a response to that. It's just so cool to be able to see how true it is that God does heal through creativity and hearing it from like real people that have lived it, like you. And it's so interesting the path that God took you on to really exploring the depths of this topic that a lot of people just don't fully understand. And often as a creative in the church, I've felt kind of just a little in the dark about like, what does God think of my creativity? And is there anything in history, in scripture, that can kind of point us to the truth about his idea of creativity and also our purpose with it, you know? So it's really cool that you got to study that, and I know you have a wealth of knowledge to share. One of the questions I have is, what is something that you wish creatives knew about God that maybe they don't know?
I think that it's really important to know that God can handle whatever it is that you create, like no matter how ugly or raw it is. It can be easy, especially growing up in the church or like in Christian culture, to kind of try to make what you create acceptable, or to be worried that it might be offensive or whatever, to like try to like make it fit this box of what is accepted theologically. We try to like temper it, make it nicer or prettier. We try to like always make sure that hope is provided when it's something that is bleak that we're like trying to work with. And I think that like while that's a good intention, it often tempers something that would have more meaning and substance to it if it was allowed to like be. And I think God can handle that. I don't think that necessarily means that it will be shared with other people. I think that discernment comes in after, and that's when you kind of polish and decide like, is this something that should be shared? But I think in your creative process, wrestling with God is really important, and allowing space for that and just knowing that He is there to wrestle with you. If you always try to temper the things that you create, you risk never creating anything with substance because you're often hiding from yourself or from God. At least that's what I've felt a struggle with. And I think why I've seen people become frustrated with a lot of Christian branded art is because it winds up becoming a very polished, seemingly insincere form of art because people are trying to make it acceptable. If you look at the Psalms and if you look at like even some of the narrative parts of scripture, the Bible is art, and those things are not always so polished or acceptable. Again, discernment and like other things need to come in. I'm not encouraging creating blasphemous art or anything like that, but I think just creating and letting it be instead of always trying to create it to be something specific.
There's this struggle that I think a lot of faithful creatives feel. They want to honor God through their art, but I feel like the only thing they think to do is, oh, I need to make biblically inspired art or preach through my art. And I think that that's something that there's a time and place for, but I think what you're saying is true, that either we as artists kind of then feel stifled, or the stuff that we're making doesn't fully feel authentic because we feel like it has to fit into the sort of lens of specific church culture or kind of the models that you've seen of other Christian creatives, when in actuality God like gave us a lot of individuality and unique perspectives and authentic artistic voices to share, and that you don't have to necessarily try to slot yourself in. Your creativity sometimes is meant to just be an expression of your experience. And there's a lot of freedom that comes with that, I think. And you're so right about like not everything that we create necessarily has to go to the public eye. And so seeing your creative practice more as that processing can also kind of free you up. And maybe it will eventually become something that you want to share with the world.
I think we tend to temper our joy more than we are tempering our anger right now, because anger has been put on a pedestal of like righteous anger, or sadness is seen as something that's really deep. But like joy is seen as something that's like silly or superfluous, and to have like unrestrained joy often comes off as inauthentic or unsincere because it's not something that's realized as much. It's something I've actually been thinking about a lot in my own art and in the reception of art that I've been looking at is, oh, it's a lot easier to be sad, to express sadness, because it will be taken more seriously than joy. And I think that's something that the Christian art world could explore more. What does it look like to have more joy, but like joy that is presented authentically? And why is it that sometimes it feels that joy comes off as something fake or superficial or not quite as honest, or kind of just there, but only because you're ignoring the pain? Like, what does it actually look like to present authentic joy? And I think that that is something that the church is in a perfect place and context to explore, because we are given joy by God.
It's almost like there's been a pendulum swing just in culture in general, like that feeling of like, oh, like not everyone's happy all the time. Oh, there's like other emotions, there's other things, and that's like the authentic human experience. But then even in like, honestly, even in my darkest times this past year, I have still felt God's joy because he gives it to us, and it is something to like experience, and it's not something that we conjure up. But somehow there's that connotations that it's like, oh, it's not authentic. Like, how do you express that? in an authentic way. You can't prove it in some way, you know? I think there's some room, like you're saying, to explore how else can we express it in maybe new ways than we have before that aren't stereotypical or tropes that maybe we've used in art in the past to express joy. Yeah, something I want to like start considering too, because especially right now, like, we need light and joy in this world as much as honesty about the darkness too. Yeah, I'm curious, in studying art and theology, how has that shaped your creativity?
I think really helped me become better at noticing and at paying attention to things. And I think that that is the most important skill that an artist can have, is attention, because we are creating from what has already been created. And so to pay attention to the things that God has created and to pay attention to what he is doing through others and through creation then helps us become better creators. And learning to just like press into that when it's hard. When you don't really like the way that something looks and you don't really want to look at it, but still looking at it and trying to see it for what it is instead of seeing it for what you want it to be, it's made me experiment a lot more and try to find my own vision. It's also given me a better understanding of what it looks like to collaborate with others and what it truly means that art is expression, and that it's not something that is useful necessarily, but it's not useful. It's like more than useful. It's a grace and a gift from God. And seeing it in that way has helped me to be a better artist because I'm not trying to make it unuseful. Understanding and appreciating art for its usefulness and then also for its excess has been one of the things that has really impacted me. I also think that it may have informed my practice in ways that I haven't realized yet.
Sometimes it's hard to talk about what inspires our art because it's so many different things, and it can be like the most nuanced thing that goes into our subconscious and we don't even realize it, you know? And so you having all of these experiences of studying art and studying theology and understanding kind of the more intellectual side of art, it's maybe unclear right now how that has impacted you, but I think it still has shaped and informed your creativity and the way that you talk about art. And I feel like that's just something even inspiring for other creatives. We're all getting inspired by each other. I'm curious if you noticed different eras in history and the church that creativity was more elevated or encouraged.
Art began as a religious expression, as most things were, because people were simply more religious. It wasn't until later that they started being recognized for like a specific role, and then even later that like artists started signing their names. And then this whole idea of what an artist is kind of developed and became its own thing. As far as creativity, though, I don't think that there's necessarily one era that is more creative than the other. I think there are some that seem more creative to us looking back, but I think that's also because we're looking at certain kinds of things as more creative than other things. I think also as visual artists, the thing that comes into consideration the most is kind of this iconoclasm and iconography and the kind of rupture that happens with the Reformation and even before that, just this kind of split in images and what it means to create images and what art was accepted and what art was rejected as idolatry or superfluous or whatever. Music is something that has been in the church forever and survived that like iconoclasm. But then like dance, for instance, might have been more popular in one era than the other one, or visual art. Creativity or art specifically has been accepted by the church in some ways and rejected in other ways. Specifically, like Protestant or Reformation churches, there's a big rupture that happened there. And so, coming from that tradition, like both of us have grown up Protestant, it does feel like, oh, the church is more creative now than it was because those things are becoming more acceptable again and revisited again. But the Catholic Church, for instance, has maintained this art, or this connection to art and this idea of like art as worship throughout history. There's also different like Eastern traditions and traditions throughout the world who practice Christianity, and like creativity comes into that differently than what we can understand now, or like what I understand because I haven't studied them.
That's so true. It's easy to forget when you're in a specific sort of sect or denomination of the church to forget that there's so many other expressions of the faith across the world. Why does it seem sometimes like we think the church isn't creative? Like there's this kind of disconnect, and I'm curious if you've noticed in your studies if that's true, or if maybe the way that we're seeing it is just a little different than maybe other people would in different times.
I think, like, back to what we were saying earlier about authenticity and polishing things, I think that might be part of why the church is not seen as creative or creative enough, or maybe that, like, Christian art isn't taken seriously. I think that that's a more recent concept than we think. Like, Christian art is even like a more recent concept because art is art. Like, and like most of the art that we consume in a secular space in like a gallery, the artist who created it has their own religious background that we may or may not know of. A lot of the famous pieces that we have in the Western world are pieces that have spiritual content. A good book to read on that is Rembrandt in the Wind, or Rembrandt is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey. And he discusses a lot about our preconceived notions of art and Christian art, and these different artists who we don't even realize had these really strong faiths and were creating their art out of that faith. There's also a sense of what we think art is, or the main things that we have associated with art, whether it be visual art or performing arts, that have kind of been tossed aside, particularly by the Protestant church, because of cultural shifts and changes. But out of that time, when visual art was cast aside, there was also this amazing literature that was being produced and writings. Like, for instance, you have Paradise Lost by Milton and things like that. And so creativity might have just like looked different then, but it didn't mean that it was less creative. There's also the aspect of, throughout history, the church has placed aesthetics at a different value than at other times. That's probably more what we're thinking of like, it doesn't mean they're less creative, but aesthetics themselves and the aesthetic experience was maybe not valued as highly in one period than it was in another. For instance, churches are a really good example of this. The way that churches look and the buildings the actual church service inhabits. You have like Notre Dame, and you have like these amazing, exquisite, took hundreds of years to produce buildings because aesthetics were valued highly because they were seen as something that allowed you to have a closer experience with God, or something that allowed you to look up towards God. They were devotional things. A lot of that has to do with the culture changing from something that was more visual and audible to word-based. In the Reformation, you see a elevation of the word, and that is part of why you'll see visual art be devalued, because the word is valued so highly. And then in those periods, there might be a better literary practice than there is a visual practice. However, that doesn't mean that it's not creative. In the last few years, going back to like churches and architecture, you see like warehouse churches, and like it doesn't really matter what it looks like as long as we're meeting and we're together, and as long as the word is being preached. And that is because we have been taught to value the word, which is something that we should value, but doesn't mean that aesthetics have to be devalued. And I think because in culture we've seen more of a return to the aesthetic and an appreciation of beauty and what aesthetics can do and what their place is in a spiritual practice, you'll see a shift towards Anglicanism and more of a shift towards like ritual practices and things like that. A lot of those involve aesthetic, embodied things. And I think as we're moving more towards or exploring more of what it means to be embodied, we're also exploring more of the value of aesthetics, because aesthetics are something that is physical and that we have like a a physical, emotional reaction too.
That's so interesting. I think having that overarching understanding can maybe give Christian creatives more perspective. And again, it's just good things to be aware of and even explore. Maybe if you are more of a visual artist or if you're a writer, like the different times that the church has really had that kind of moment where it seems those types of mediums are thriving, because it can be inspiration. And I think sometimes we don't put two and two together about that. And yeah, I think it's not necessarily that we always have to be making art for the church in the church. But I've often felt that as a visual artist, I'm like, oh, like I feel like we could really benefit from having visuals as well as the words or things like that, you know? And so I think that's something that I want to keep exploring in my creativity. And I think maybe it's something that drives other creatives too, to be like, how can we re-envision connecting with God through creativity? Knowing about these kinds of movements and just kind of overarching themes throughout history that can really help inform you of what has been done and also where God may want to take you personally as an artist and help you bring creativity into your community, into your sphere of influence, and help people connect to God through it. Working at Upside Down, how have you seen creative community play a part in helping people connect with God?
So just to kind of get into what my role is at Upside Down, I mainly work with curating the art shows and then also designing community art projects and hosting like a watercolor, just sit down and paint event on Fridays. I thought it was interesting that you like mentioned community because one, it's a huge value of Upside Down. That's like both in the coffee and the art aspect of things, but it has been what I've explored the most in art since being here in this role because of the community art project specifically. And it's something that I never really had explored in my art before now. I had done like some collaborative work with other artists and with writers and photographers and designers when I did the art and theology journal, but this is the first time that I was designing a piece for other people to interact with and to finish and to like leave something unfinished for the community to finish and to create and change in the way that it was going to change. It taught me several things. It taught me how to help others engage with the world around them creatively. That's a really important thing for me actually, and one of the reasons why I wanted to become a teacher was because I want other people to notice and appreciate the beauty of the world around them because it makes your life better. It's a more enriched life, but also because I think we get so focused on everything else going on in our lives that we don't pay enough attention to the things that we are doing or saying or the things that we live with. And creating something can help you better notice the things around you. Better noticing the things around you helps you love better, and that like makes you a better person. If you look to scripture, the greatest commandments being love God and love your neighbor, and the law of love and things like that, I think creativity as a way to learn to love is really significant, and it's been one of the things that I've kind of been reflecting on a lot since inviting other people into creativity. I think also through just having time to sit and talk with people while they paint. It's something that's very therapeutic because you're giving attention to something and slowing down and allowing yourself to just be present. That's something that at least I've struggled with and other people I've talked to in our generation struggle with technology and the ways that we can be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so I think creative practices have the ability to really help form and create community because they require slowing down, they require attention, they require often aid from somebody else, and they help us see better, which helps us love better. And that's what I've been learning.
I love that. I definitely resonate a lot with the things that you're talking about, with just the ways that community and creativity overlap and enrich each other. Because even I often, as a visual artist, I'm kind of painting alone. Like I'm making stuff and I'm connecting with God through that. But then being in community and making art, that's another way to engage with God in ways that we maybe don't put two and two together sometimes. And that idea of being present, that just allows you to be more present to other people and to God. I really do love just what Upside Down is doing with those sort of interactive artist installations and everything. Like, I remember there was one when I first came in, and there was like notes that like people were writing on and responding to each other, like messages and stuff. And it was just so cool to see that. Yeah, I was just reading all of them, and it really touches you. And I love the idea of being able to just kind of be more aware of your surroundings and see both the people in front of you, because I think that's something we struggle with so much, being on our phones and just being elsewhere, like you're saying, like being present to people, but also opening your eyes to the world God's created, maybe receiving things from that and hearing from Him in those ways. So I think that's so cool.
Yeah, I think also having a space that is reserved for that, because reality is that a lot of people don't have a space or the opportunity to create because of whatever circumstances in their life, whether it be like busyness or accessibility. And so to make that accessible has been one of the most significant things I think that I've seen be done through those art projects and through having free watercolor and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, it's been so great chatting with you, Zemeira. I want to just leave our viewers with just a few resources, anything that you can think of if they're curious about exploring theology and art and kind of all the things that you've been talking about. Are there any sort of books or resources that you found helpful that could be a good launching off point?
Yeah, some really good books that I could recommend, depending on like how deep you want to get into it, or if you're coming at it from an artist or as an appreciator of art. Mako Fujimura is great. His Art and Faith book is, I think, great for if you're just kind of beginning and really curious. Puts things in a very simple way and a very beautiful way as well. And it's one of the first books that I read on art and faith. And he just brings up interesting questions. I think a really good place to start if you want to go deeper with art and theology is A Theological Aesthetics, a Reader by Jessa Elizabeth Thiessen, or she edited it. It's a ton of essays that are exploring specifically theological aesthetics, which is an aesthetics rooted in theology. So you're understanding what is beautiful based off of who God is. That's a great resource. I think there's resources online that you can find as well. My school, University of St. Andrews, had their own articles and things that they post online, and I think that's called Transept. If you look it up, you can find it. And then a theologian that I've found brings up really interesting questions and has a lot of depth is David Bentley Hart. He's from the Eastern Orthodox tradition, and his discussions on beauty, and specifically his studies on Aquinas and what Aquinas says about beauty, are really interesting and inspiring. There's literally so many resources that I could recommend, but those are some of the ones that I think have made the most impact on me, or are kind of like places where I started with studying art and theology.
That's amazing. I'll definitely link those in the show notes for people to explore, and also Upside Down, because it's such a cool place. And if you're in LA, you definitely need to come check it out and come say hi to Zemeira and get some coffee. But thanks so much for coming on, Zemeira. It's so good chatting with you about art, faith, theology. You have so much to offer, and I can't wait. This is going to be the first of many, I'm sure, of chats about all of this. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
That was such a good conversation. I hope that really opened your eyes to the ways that God sees your creativity and cares about your art. And I hope you feel inspired to explore this idea of art and theology combining, and that it'll just bring this richness to your creative practice. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the topics we covered, so feel free to leave a comment, and I can't wait to keep the conversation going in the next episode.